at which time we'll ask the interview questions. All firms will be asked the same questions, but there may be follow-up questions based upon the responses that you give. So with that, we're ready for you to begin your 10-minute presentation.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Rob. And thank you very much to the committee for giving us this opportunity to be considered for this consulting role within your organization. With that, can I ask that we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. From a very high level, our organization provides traditional risk-mitigated, independent advice to boards related to executive and director compensation and corporate governance. And again, that's at a very high level. We have offices located throughout North America in Miami, Fort Lauderdale area, which is the hub of our U.S. operation, and then north of the border of yourself in Toronto and Calgary. Overall, we truly believe that our clients' day-to-day and longer-term governance capabilities need to be aided, and we help that their overall success and sustainability of the organizations that these boards are entrusted to oversee. We claim, and we do strongly say, that we are independent and that we're risk-free because we solely focus our advice and our services at the board level. We're founded on the premises that properly designed governance practices and performance-focused compensation plans supported by a high-performing board and a proven strategy are truly the linchpins that enable organizational performance and increase stakeholder returns. And that's universal in both the private sector and the public sector as well. Next slide, please.
Perfect. And to build off of Brad's points, we have a really strong project leadership team that we put together. You know, of course, you've been introduced to Brad Kelly and myself. We actually lead our firm's education program that we run within CalPERS for the accredited fiduciary program. So work with, you know, tens, if not hundreds of pension funds in providing education on similar matters to what we're discussing today. But we have one other senior leadership partner on our team, Luis Navas. He sends his regards. He's actually just in the process of driving his daughter to her first year of university. And so he apologized for not being able to join as well today. But Luis is also a key member of our project team. We've all worked over the years in transforming and working in leading pension funds in dealing with the ever evolving questions around the in-house versus external investing model. We've helped them put in place the proper incentive programs and structures with which to be able to successfully recruit individuals into their funds, and this includes for the last decade or so working with the CalSTRS board in dealing with their executive compensation and investment staff compensation challenges, as well as other leading North American pension funds, both in the United States, but also in Canada, that have dealt with these types of concerns. So we all bring a great deal of knowledge of the pension fund space, but also to pepper that knowledge in with our experience working also in the private sector with other leading investment management organizations and other financial institutions, as well as across all industries, to bring together best practices that can be followed. So if you can just turn to the next slide. In terms of the services we offer, Brad mentioned, at a high level, executive compensation and governance advice, but we really focus it into 4 pillars. I'll focus most of my time just very quickly on the executive compensation pillar, because that's most in line with what we'd be requested to do for CalPERS. And that's where we actually help our boards in thinking through what the compensation philosophy and strategy and policy looks like at the end of the day. We'll do pay benchmarking or compensation reviews as well. We help them with their performance management challenges, think through of the incentive plan design, stress testing those designs to make sure that they work as intended, making sure that there's the right balance between quantitative and qualitative performance at the end of the day, making sure that even on the qualitative side or non-investment side, that you can quantify as much as possible what performance looks like. And then we also do compensation risk audits for some of North America's leading banks. We'll do other sort of pay for performance analysis to make sure that on a relative basis for the investment returns you're getting, that the pay is in alignment. So in that pillar, we do a lot of work, but also we do a lot of work on CEO succession planning, which is another part of the HR compensation committee's mandate, we find, all the way from strategy articulation through the process. We don't do any search, but we can help thinking through all the other stages of the CEO succession planning process besides just search. And then on the governance side, we do a lot of work with across North America with pension funds in terms of board education sessions on a variety of different topics, but also on board effectiveness assessments. So questionnaire development, follow-on interviews, coming up with roadmaps on how improvements can be made to overall governance practices. But again, it's all of these four pillars that really allow us to not just focus on the what in terms of what to pay people, but also how are you going to implement it? How are you going to get successful buy-in at the end of the day? And it's really through experience in all four of these areas that we're able to provide that level of service. If we can move to the next slide. And then here is just a sample of the types of organizations we've worked with. So I mentioned CalSTRS before, but there's also several other state-run pension plans. We've worked with city, municipal plans. And then you can also see outside of just the pension fund space, also some leading financial institutions across North America, firms like State Street, BMO, Onyx, Fiera Capital, those types of organizations. So we bring a nice understanding of, yes, the pension fund space with our strong knowledge there, but also, when you're competing against the private sector and some of these other financial institutions, what some of the pay practices are there as well, and what you need to be aware of when you're looking to recruit talent into a pension plan. So we bring that good, solid, across the board experience to the table. Next slide, please.
And so with our firm, we're one of the few firms out there that we actually walk the talk. We do a lot of pro bono education for pension trustees throughout North America, really trying to up their game so that they can practice current governance best practices within their boardrooms. We're strong supporters of the DB community. We're strong supporters of the retention and sustainability of DB plans throughout North America. And we are probably the only fund, or we're the only fund that we know of, that has worked with some of these large, major global investment entities that have transformed from your traditional pension fund to what we see now as globally recognized investment entities throughout the world. Our partnership with CalPERS, Kelly Fox actually sat on the board when we implemented this program and when we were shaping this program. He's very, very knowledgeable of why the program was put in place and why we're doing this. It's an accredited fiduciary program that we offer through CalPERS. And this, we know, puts us to the forefront of pension compensation and governance education for funds. A huge part of our accredited program is on human capital management and how boards can properly navigate that process within their fiduciary role. Provides us with a unique insight in emerging trends and issues within North America pension funds and marketplace. We even get brought in to speak to legislative committees and members of the legislature and Senate to talk about what should be done at the state level with some of their funds and some of the problems that they're currently experiencing. And we know that this truly positions us to assist our clients in providing reliable governance, performance, and compensation information for the organizations that we serve. The next slide, please. And finally, what sets us apart from some of the other organizations that might be considered for this role? Traditionally, you can expect working with us fair, defensible, risk-mitigated compensation and incentive programs. And everyone's going to say the same thing. We can honestly say that through our track record, our clients come out with strengthened recruitment and retention practices within their organization. They are now able to attract strong talent, oftentimes globally in some of these key economic centers that they're located. And really the element that sets us apart is that we are strategic advisors first and foremost. As Peter mentioned, we not just talk about the what, but we talk about the why and the how, which in terms of today's pension environment, that's critical in terms of headline risk management, in terms of human capital risk management, and we work strategically with the board to make sure that all the boxes are checked before any decisions are made. We provide ongoing strategic advice and insight from us as known experts in the not-for-profit and not-for-profit, and for-profit and not-for-profit institutional investment space. And what we really try and do is balance the objectives and the needs of both the board, the stakeholders, and the executives, because again, there's multiple perspectives that get brought into this process, and we make sure that we're working collectively with all aspects of parties that are interested in this to make sure that we're coming to the best outcome and the best interests of the fund. That is our primary objective, is to make sure that the fund is getting the best advice and is moving in the best way forward in terms of sustaining its overall sustainability. So with that, having been said, I guess we can open it up for questions. And again, we thank you for your time.
Very good, thank you. So question number one, based on your response to section 7 of attachment F, proposal questionnaire in the RFP, your firm indicated you would agree to CalPERS standard contract terms and conditions. Can you please confirm your response for us?
Yes, we will reconfirm that we will adhere to those terms and conditions.
Thank you. Second question, Ms. Ortega.
Thank you. The second question is, based on your knowledge of CalPERS, the Board of Administration and its Performance Compensation and Talent Management Committee, and our incentive compensation program, what actions would your firm take within the first 120 days if selected?
Brad, do you want to cover that, or do you want me to?
You can start with that, Peter.
Okay, perfect. So what we do with any first engagement with any new client is have one-on-one confidential interviews with key board members, say members of the HR committee, as well as key members of staff, typically your CEO, your CIO, maybe one or two other, maybe COOs, that type of thing. And that's really to get the land in terms of, you know, people's views on the overall strategy, policy, how it's working, what's not working about the plan. We also do a dive in terms of doing a wholesome review of your current policy, making sure that, you know, it's aligning with best practices and identifying potential tweaks in areas around your compensation policy framework, those types of things, making sure we have a good lay and foundation to start our work and get an understanding of the strategy and all of those different aspects as sort of a first step as part of our process. We would then report that back to the committee on sort of our findings, any recommendations in terms of areas to explore further in relation to the compensation plan. And then really it would be sort of through those interviews that we would understand what are the current pain points, what are sort of the first action items that we need to look at. So if something came up and we said, oh, it looks like people, you know, are concerned about the current pay levels of the organization, well, we would probably then proceed into suggesting a you know, benchmarking or a pay review. Or maybe it's something where it comes up and says, you know what, we're, you know, feeling that, you know, the short-term incentive plan isn't aligning as well to the objectives as we first thought. And so we would then follow that up with a more deeper dive into that incentive plan and the makeup of quantitative and qualitative performance. So it's really those initial foundational interviews and findings and understanding those pain points. From there, we would then craft up, you know, what the next steps in terms of reviewing the pay program would be. Maybe Brad, if you want to have anything to add.
Well, and that, to be specific, that would be kind of the front end, and that's typically what we would do coming in. But then once we have identified some of these issues that need to be addressed, we would start strategically working with your board to identify ways in which you can further refine and improve that program within the legislative confines to make sure that you're getting the most out of this. And you're also, to some extent, really increasing your internal capabilities and starting to chip away at those external money management costs. I know you've done a great job in terms of cutting back in terms of the number of external money managers and management organizations that you currently contract on an annual basis. But we've done a great job working with similar size funds that have truly mitigated this external expense and been able to roll that back into enhanced investment opportunities moving forward.
And I'll only add one other thing. One thing we have seen some of the leading pension funds start to do within their incentive programs is look at moving potentially away from relative value add performance and looking at, what's our actuarial rate of return that we want to achieve over a long-term basis, and starting to potentially modify their incentive plans to focus more on that absolute return that meets that actuarial threshold at the end of the day, because that's long-term what's going to allow the pension fund to fund the benefits. So that is one area that we could explore with you as part of the shorter term incentive plan, not your longer term plan. As your shorter term plan is, do we look at maybe potentially moving away even on that plan away from the relative value add to maybe an absolute return basis for that as well. So that's one thing based on the current structure that we see that potentially could require looking into a little further in the first 120 days.
Very good, thank you. The next question is Ms. Middleton, please.
Thank you. What current compensation issues exist for public sector employers as related to incentive pay and highly compensated executive and investment management positions? And how might those issues impact CalPERS' ability to attract, hire, and retain high-quality executive and investment management team members?
That's a great question. Brad, maybe I'll start again, and Brad, you can fill in after. We're actually dealing with these challenges right now with some of the leading pension funds in North America. And one of the bigger areas, especially because of COVID, is this sort of dynamic where the incentive program is, coming out to a certain calculation, and it relates to, certain payouts that are owed to investment staff, senior staff, but yet you're contrasting that with state budgets that are getting hammered by, by the impacts of COVID. You have, public employees having to potentially take staff cuts due to these budget pressures, things like that. And so the idea of board discretion and how does the board effectively either apply some special discretion or choose not to apply any special discretion has definitely come up in the last few months, especially as we've entered COVID. And I think it's about making sure that you have reviewed your overall incentive program, that you're generally comfortable with the general weighting right now between quantitative and qualitative performance. But then at the end of the day, if you have, 1 in every 10 year scenario like we're facing potentially with COVID, allowing the board to have that level of special discretion to be able to adjust payments, not only downward, which a lot of us think about, but even certain situations where someone might have really done some extraordinary things as an individual, and being able to apply positive discretion when when the formulaic results don't maybe adequately reflect their contributions, is a key area that pension funds and all organizations deal with on a regular basis. And so it's making sure that you have the right tools at the board level to apply special discretion, not very often, maybe once every 10 years, but making sure you're comfortable and you have the right features in place. And I think, too, it's about making sure long-term with pension funds, are you meeting that actuarial threshold? And, as long as you're meeting that threshold and gaining those adequate returns for your stakeholders, being able to then reward the professionals that have helped to create those returns and provide those good member services. It is a balancing act and a difficult one, but I think it's about having a solid foundational program in place, being comfortable with the design, having that special discretion at the end of the day that you can apply, but making sure that you're adequately balancing the talent needs at the end of the day to make sure that you're able to recruit that talent in, because you don't want to just unilaterally say, we're not paying any incentives, because that probably gives you heightened risk of losing people. You want to make sure you have that good balance in place between the two.
Now, just to add on that, we should be clear that Peter and I are constantly speaking at pension conferences all over North America, and we're not necessarily popular because we're often the only ones speaking on good governance and good human capital management practices, and talking about how organizations can increase their ability to attract and retain good investment talent internally. And the external markets don't like this because they want to protect their market share. They want to protect their salary and compensation levels. And we often say pensions don't need to be paying Wall Street levels, but they do need to be paying competitively. And so it's about properly defining how you're going to benchmark that, how you're going to determine what is fair, but then also making sure that you're able to have a risk mitigated plan in place that's really focused on performance, a performance driven plan that rewards organizations, and have a board that has the true understanding of the plan, how it works and why it works that way, so they can defend it and say, yes, we know for a fact that we're not paying Wall Street rates. It may seem that we're paying a bit higher than your average taxpayer here in our community, but these are people who are entrusted with overseeing hundreds of billions of dollars. And so we need to have something that can attract the talent that we need to help manage organizations that are of this size. And we need to be able to pay them fairly. We often say that, again, you don't have to pay Wall Street rates, because oftentimes there's a great opportunity for investment talent to move to really great places throughout North America. So the value proposition, if you position it right in terms of the overall package that you're offering, really helps you to recruit and retain strong investment talent. And we know that for a fact.
Very good, thank you. The next question is Ms. Olivares.
Thank you. The scope of services for this contract includes the provision of compensation-related educational sessions or workshops. If asked to provide this service one or more times during the course of the contract, what approach would you take to design a session? And what key topics would be important to share with us during such a session?
So this is something that we are often asked to do with our clients because of its importance, especially in terms of board understanding and ongoing education, commitment to education. And so typically what we would do is, once we were asked to plan such a session, we would work with a steering committee to identify what are the key areas that your organization would benefit from. Understanding Peter and I and the number of times we present, we could speak for days on end, but it's really about defining what is specifically needed by your organization. Once we've identified that, then we would tailor something that meets the specific needs of your board and the education interests of your board. Oftentimes, if you look at kind of a skills matrix approach and looking at the backgrounds and education of your board members, that also is a way to identify key areas that would benefit your organization, your board. And so that being said, in terms of specific areas, we are often asked to talk about ongoing best practices and trends that we're seeing both in the private and public sector. So you're able to be competitive on both sides. And also we get asked to talk a lot about fund sustainability and how human capital can be further enhanced and managed in a way that enables funds to further, as I mentioned before, cut their external money management fees, bring in some internal capabilities, and truly benefit your members to the best of your extent.
And the only thing I will add to Brad's point of, some of the things that have come up in recent sessions with other pension fund clients. One is this idea around, how to properly use special discretion in situations like COVID-19, where you're getting sort of calculated incentive results and you're trying to balance out that potentially with the external market of what's facing, whether it's, state budget difficulties, whether it's staff cuts across the board. So, doing sessions like that around, how to properly put in place special discretion, what are certain events that might trigger, the use of special discretion is one thing. We've also done in the last few years several education sessions around incentive plan design practices in terms of not only just the annual incentive program and what are other pension funds and investment managers doing, but even on the long-term incentive plan side. We know that, you've introduced a long-term incentive plan in the last couple of years as part of your puzzle. So giving knowledge about how, those plan design practices are evolving, especially in the pension fund space, because things are constantly evolving. If I think to 10, 15 years ago, those types of plans were all relative value added plans. Now we've seen the evolution towards more of an absolute return basis. There's some interesting things that some of the Canadian funds are doing from a long-term incentive plan design perspective. So education sessions, like Brad mentioned, on trends and how incentive plans are evolving, the use of special discretion, things like that, are just a couple of topics that come to mind that I think could be beneficial, especially in the current COVID-19 environment.
Thank you. The next question is Ms. Middleton. You're muted, Lisa.
Thank you. Describe your experience working with diverse boards or similar bodies which operate in public settings. What do you do to balance the needs of the board, the organization, its members, and beneficiaries when you develop and present recommendations?
So we truly understand that these boards are comprised of various levels of background, skills, capabilities. And so we see as every interaction with the board an education opportunity. So as I mentioned before, we not just advise on the what, but we really get to the how, so that all your board members truly understand why it is we've recommended what we recommended, how it's going to be implemented, and what's the rationale, the why behind it. And we want to make sure that all board members understand this, so that because it is a headline risk, and if they're asked, why are these individuals being paid what they're paid, they're armed with that information, that objective and subjective and best trends information that they can quickly mention and reference, so that they're truly working in the best interest of your organization. Again, it's about making sure education. We can talk at a high level, we can talk technicalities in jargon, but that's not going to benefit your board or its members. We want to make sure that everyone says, yes, this is truly in best interest of our organization and all our members, all our stakeholders, and it truly has passed what we would say is the smell test in terms of assessing our fiduciary role or providing our fiduciary role within this board. Anything to add?
Yeah, just in terms of, just to follow up a little bit to what Brad said, from a process perspective, we very much work with the board. We work on behalf of the board and on behalf of the fund as a whole. And so, we definitely are cognizant of, the public nature of these meetings. Oftentimes they're recorded, they might be live streamed, those types of things. And so we're very comfortable in those settings. And, what we like to do is, have good discussions with the board beforehand on what the specific needs are, develop draft materials, and understand all of those political ramifications and things like that, as well as part of drafting any of our reports, and making sure that all of our reports, of course, are accessible, that they're in line with any requirements from an accessibility perspective. So from that perspective, we understand that we need to be cognizant of that. And I think to Brad's earlier point, it's all about just making sure that at the end of the day, whatever decisions are being made, that a proper process is being followed by the board, and that you can point to those specific results at the end of the day. Yes, we spent this amount of money on internal investment talent, but here are the actual savings at the end of the day that we were able to generate as opposed to outsourcing this to external money managers. And I think that's where you can really make the case. And what some of the leading pension funds are doing in North America is making sure that in their disclosure, assuming they have the information available, making sure that that's communicated to the membership, to make sure that they know, yes, we've gone to this internal strategy, but this is how much value-added savings we've had at the end of the day. And if you can, be able to point to those statistics, that really helps in defending any of the decisions along with the proper process that the board is making.
Thank you. Brings us to question 6, Ms. Olivares.
Thank you. Describe your experience developing incentive plan recommendations, which include qualitative and quantitative performance objectives, as well as shared organizational quantitative performance objectives. What key elements must be considered to create meaningful, measurable objectives?
I'll quickly start, and then Brad, if you want to add. I think, as we think through, the different levels of the organization, you're going to see that at the more senior levels of the organization, you'll want to have a higher weighting within the incentive program on the quantitative total fund results. So, total fund investment results, you might quantify it by looking at, your relative costs against other funds, but really pointing to overall organizational objectives, whether they be quantifiable investment objectives or quantifiable non-investment related objectives, whether it's costs or different things like that, maybe even member satisfaction scores. And then as you make, your way, further down the organization, that's where you start to have more of an equal weighting between the quantitative and the qualitative, because, especially say at the total fund level, those individuals at lower levels may not have as much influence over total fund results. They work maybe within a specific asset class and contribute to that asset class's results. So you're going to see a higher weighting on the asset class results as compared to total fund. And then from a qualitative perspective, what we really like to do is, yes, have a meaningful weighting. At more senior levels, it might be 20%. At lower levels, it might be closer to 50-50, that type of thing. But making sure as much as possible that on the qualitative side, you can even come up with objective descriptions of what that qualitative performance looks like at the end of the day, so that at the end of the year, when you as a board or even, the CEO or the CIO have to do these assessments for their staff, they can actually point and say, yes, this individual met this description, so it's, closer to a rating of 5, or, they didn't meet this description, so it's more of a rating of 3. But the more that you can quantify or put descriptions to even the qualitative side of things, it makes it easier at the end of the day, again, to justify why you made the incentive decision that you had. And so that's where, having that delicate balance and making sure you can have as much descriptions and that in place reduces the overall opinion that, oh, they just like that person, so they gave them a higher rating. So you want to, again, it all comes down to process and making sure you have that proper process in place and design.
And understanding that we're coming close to the end of our time, just to add to that, we not only talk about what people achieve, but how they've achieved it, because oftentimes that is just as important. You can hit your objective targets, but you could do it in a detrimental way that affects overall morale within the organization, retention with the organization, which now has a material impact on your organization. You want to make sure that, especially people in key leadership roles, they're doing it in a way that's positive for the organization, that they're doing it in a way that's developing the team and developing the overall capabilities and efficiencies and effectiveness of that team. If not, they're being paid strictly for hitting objective targets, and they could be doing it, as I said before, in a very detrimental way to long-term sustainability of your organization.
Thank you. Brings us to question 7. Ms. Ortega.
Thank you. As the board's independent consultant, how do you ensure independence yet maintain a collaborative working relationship with CalPERS management and/or team members?
So first and foremost, all our mandates are with the board, and with the board, we work for the board, for stakeholders, and we work with management because it's important to engage management. Some consultants would say that no, they want to keep them out. We engage the management team because it's important in terms of the overall probability of success that we engage all the stakeholders that are in play. So that's first and foremost. And the other thing is, we don't provide any other ancillary services. We don't do accounting, auditing, actuarial work. We focus on compensation and governance issues. And so therefore, we know that we're not chasing another contract on another side that could be negotiated with management. This is our focus. Our focus is really on stakeholder interests and working for the board and making sure that we're helping them fulfill their fiduciary role within the organization.
And the only thing I'll add quickly is, as part of that interview process up front, we engage management at that point and the board and get both sides' opinions so that we can get, both sides of the issue, get that buy-in hopefully from both sides, but ultimately, like Brad said, reporting into the board at the end of the day, but making sure that we are getting the views of management brought forward so we have that understanding of both sides.
Thank you. And I do have a quick follow-up question from Ms. Ortega.
Yeah, I wanted to, I had 2 questions. One, I wanted to go back to something that was said earlier about moving away from the relative value added by the executive staff versus the absolute value. And I wondered if you could say a little more about that concept.
Yeah, so this would obviously be part of a broader discussion. So it's not one way or the other. But what we have started to see with some of the leading funds, if I look at OMERS, for example, in Canada, they actually have gotten away in their incentive programs from any use of relative value add returns. They basically look at what is our, I think it's 3 or 4, I think it's a 3-year absolute return. Did it on an annualized basis, generally aligned with our actuarial threshold, which I think is around 7%. Don't quote me on that, but I think it's 7%. And then from there, they've set up a schedule that says if we outperform, you get a little bit higher. If you underperform, and then of course, if you don't hit a certain level of absolute return on an annualized basis, that part of the incentive doesn't get paid. And then what they do, which is a little different, is they have an incentive pot of which a certain portion gets paid out right away, a certain portion then gets deferred and paid out over 3 years, and that tracks the overall total fund return on that forward-looking 3-year basis. And so they've really gotten away from the use of relative value add within the incentive plan, focused it more on the overall absolute returns. But again, that would be more forward-looking. I would say the majority are still using this relative value add, but it is something to look at as another way of approaching incentive plan designs.
Okay, thank you. Another question I had was on one of the things you mentioned in the first 120 days would be the one-on-one interviews with board members and key staff. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of data you use to do some of the compensation analysis data that you get from within the department?
So when you say data, because our interviews obviously are somewhat qualitative, we look at different areas. So what our interviews focus on is, one, what is the strategy long-term of the organization? Yes, of course, we'll read your business plan, strategic plan, but we always like to get the thoughts of the board and staff to make sure everyone's on the same page. So that's one area. We also look at the overall philosophy on pay, which includes, what are some of the high level principles and statements around pay, but also what's the peer group look like? Where do we want to be positioned against that peer group at the end of the day? Is it just public funds? Is it a mixture of public and private funds? Does it differ maybe depending on management staff versus investment staff? So we get people's views in those areas as well. But then we also talk about incentive plan design. What's working? Is the level of quantitative weighting adequate or not? Are there issues around the qualitative side? Things like that. Now that you've introduced or are in the process of introducing a long-term incentive plan, how has that been going so far? Are there any concerns there? Do we want to maybe make some tweaks for future grants under the plan? We'll ask things around quantity and quality of talent, things like that, fairness of pay, other reasons why people work at CalPERS besides just compensation and getting a fair compensation opportunity. What are those intrinsic values that Brad talked about earlier that allow you to compete knowing that you can't necessarily pay Wall Street levels? So what brings people to work there? So we talk about all of those things and then basically summarize all of the key themes. So we don't report, this person said this and this person said that. It's very much the key high-level themes of the interviews. And that's what then lets us to go into the comp strategy, policy, what have you, and say, okay, I think this needs a little bit of a tweak, or you may want to look at this, or, oh, you know what, people have said that they're really, the qualitative rating system isn't working too well. Maybe we need to, look into that and revamp that, and we can work with the board and staff to look at, a better process in terms of the qualitative side. So that's why we love to do those interviews, is to really get a good understanding of the pain points. And then that can, again, impact, what are our next steps in terms of what are the key priorities to improve upon in the comp program.
Do you ever look into vacancy rates or recruitment pools, how long it takes to fill certain positions that are subject to the incentive plans, things that maybe drive, where some data may help drive where the pain points are versus people's impression of what the issues are?
Yeah, I think you make, oh, Brad, if you want to go, sorry, I've been hogging up.
Sorry, absolutely. And especially when you look at attrition rates and especially specific asset classes where you may have more migration or exiting than you would want or is normal, that's where we would help to really focus in on what are the deficiencies there that need to be put in place or need to be fixed. Some funds, what we do is a probability assessment of each of the objectives put in place for the investment team, because we want to make sure that the probability of obtaining those objectives is equal amongst each of the asset classes. Otherwise, you'll have everyone exiting specific asset classes and going to what they would consider low-hanging fruit or the lob ball asset classes that are consistently paying out higher incentive levels. And so we really help to objectify where the minor tweaks should be made so that you're really focusing an equal level of fairness throughout your entire fund portfolio.
Yeah, and it'll come through the interviews too if there are turnover issues. It might be on the board side, or it might be staff speaking to us about some of the issues they're having in recruiting. And if those are highlighted as part of the interview process, I think that's where we will ask staff to look into what are some of the turnover rates, attrition rates, as Brad mentioned, and use those to inform where the problem areas might be and where we maybe have to make some tweaks, as Brad had mentioned.
So thank you. We've run out of time. I know Ms. Oliveira still had a question, but we're about 5 minutes past our timing. So with that, we're going to conclude the interview. We thank you for your presentation, for being with us today. And with that, we are going to take a 10-minute break to get ready for the next group. So again, thank you for being here. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much, everyone.